Why, the beast has the appetite of a behemoth. Just this very morn, I found him with his nose buried in my nuts. Buried in my nuts. Buried in my nuts. Found him with his nose buried in my nuts.
Blasting those bastards, then come.
Found him with his nose buried in my...
Come.
He grew up as a faithful companion to
my nuts.
Blasting come. Get you, Torgal. Get...
Buried in my nuts.
Come.
Hello, it is I, James Stephanie Sterling, once again bringing you the Jimquisition. Today I'm very excited because I am here at the Stupendium's set, where all the music videos and stuff are filmed. I have had a very exclusive invitation, so I'm very, very excited about that, and very, very special. Let's not forget special.
Hi. Did you happen... Who let you in?
Hmm?
Who let you in?
Who let me in?
Did you have an appointment?
Jimmy let me in. Well, I jimmied the lock to get in.
Why are you here?
Special invite.
Why?
Exclusive video at the Stupendium set. We are joined by the Stupendium students. It's a...
No. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, I'm sorry.
It's now or never to ever go on the train, isn't it? On the last rip-roaring episode of this sensually edifying show, we discussed Final Fantasy XVI's miserable world of gleeful slavers, and discussed the narrative issues that arise when you try so hard to make your setting gritty that everybody, up to and including the vast majority of random NPCs, are contemptible, irredeemable monsters. I introduced what I call the Poke-Plot problem, a common trait in the medium where a given video game's central premise is focused on, to the point where every character can talk about nothing else, and the in-universe culture revolves entirely around it, creating a rather one-dimensional world uncannily devoid of cultural diversity. As is typical of my work, it was a blistering, exquisite examination of an artistic medium that truly isn't worth discussing unless I'm in the conversation. But even a critic, nay, a philosopher of my pedigree sits below reproach, as do we all. And while most viewers rightly worshipped my argumentative acumen and stainless steel wit, there was some pushback to my suggestion that Final Fantasy XVI struggles to present a world worth saving due to the fact even humble villagers despise the player for being born as a magic user and treat his kind with unrepentant bigotry and often violent objectification. I don't quite know what compelled me to kick this script off with that level of undeserved self-aggrandizing. Let's just get to the soft, sticky meat of the matter. There was some really interesting discussion kicked off by my video about the tricky nature of world building in general, and whether or not it's okay for a piece of media to solely focus on the most extreme examples of real-life problems like abuse, prejudice, and slavery, while ignoring the more subtle, more insidious, often more dangerous manifestations of them. There was one quite common pushback to my argument though, one counterpoint that occurred time and time again in the comments, that what I was saying about Final Fantasy XVI's world building only really applied to the first collective arc of the game.
Fuck me.
Now, I had neglected to emphasize that by the point I'd published the video, I had indeed spent the requisite span of time to see the story shift away from 16's pervasive, everyday bigotry. I do fully admit that somewhere past a dozen or so hours in, the game's focus does indeed alter to where the common hatred of fishmongers and blacksmiths doesn't really matter. But in fairness, that's only because it went from that to the full-on genocide part, where Clive's people are being actively hunted down while many of them resent the player's liberation attempts, because Final Fantasy XVI slaves are presented almost universally as spineless victims who never do anything to help themselves and rely on the wealthy and privileged to set their meek selves free. This by the way, is a rather ignominious misrepresentation of exactly how much those oppressed by slavery have historically contributed to their own liberation efforts. That contribution having always been damn near 100%. I realise that Clive himself is a bearer, but he's fighting for a cause founded by Sid, a non-bearer known as a dominant, who, like Clive, came from a position of power and privilege. Clive's lineage is presented as heroic for treating their slaves a little bit better than everyone else. Oh, and by the way, Clive owned slaves. It's a plot point upon which the game does no reflection. But anyway, after just making statements I'm sure won't be considered contentious by anybody in the least, I'd like to address the foundational basis of the counterpoint at hand, as it's merely the latest variation of an argument I've seen in defense of video games that, while not as common as others, has cropped up over the years. The argument that a game's flaws are forgivable because the experience improves after a massive time investment. It gets good after 30 hours is the way I've always interpreted this particular defense of a video game, in no small part because I enjoy being an antagonistic little bitch about things, and I'm rarely inclined to charitable portrayals of people defending their favourite computer games from criticism. This doesn't necessarily apply to Final Fantasy XVI fans. Not all of them. The specific issue of 16's narrative conceits are a more interesting form of this debate, and folks have had a lot of interesting points to make. But let's face it, I'm talking about video game discourse here. Most examples of the it gets good argument have been little more than ignorant shit spouted by single-minded dickheads clutching at anything they can to shield a video game from criticism when it gets a review score they don't like. In this most common form, the it gets good defense is quite closely related to the you didn't finish the game one we discussed a few videos back, though this one is usually presented with a little more good faith. A genuine defense of a game's positive traits as opposed to a desperate attempt to discredit a reviewer. That said, it's still never been a comment that's particularly compelled me when it comes to video games.
Steph, it's very delicate, Steph. Please.
Breaker 019, this is the train pilot. All of the trains that are the trains, do train stuff, please.
That's the back of the microphone.
Right, check this one out though. Oh.
I feel like you've got to pull on the whistle.
Oh, it's bouncy. And the other half lived. It gets good after 30 hours in isn't just a case of me exaggerating a statement for mischievous effect. Sometimes that is very literally what people are saying to try and convince others that a game is worth playing and undeserving of certain criticisms. Quite fittingly, the first and best example is a Final Fantasy game, the notoriously base-breaking Final Fantasy XIII. I just remembered the old Hit the Hut adverts. Do you remember when they used to say Hit the Hut?
Now we hit the hut.
A lot of folks who know me know I hate Final Fantasy XIII. In fact, my review of the game still ranks among the most controversial I or anybody else has published, having enraged the fandom and invited obligatory gamers' harassment to such a degree it has never been forgotten. Look, I despise that game. I've always resented its uncharismatic presentation, po-faced setting, and the contrived story which required lengthy in-game essays to understand the context because the actual plot couldn't be fucking bothered to do its own narrative groundwork. And that's before we get to how cringe-inducing all the stupid terminology is. Now, my opinion has been subject to the usual accusations. You're biased, you're paid off, you're doing it for clicks, you didn't finish the game, you should be objective, etc. The one that stuck out the most, however, was that everything I said about Final Fantasy XIII was irrelevant because the game gets much better after 30 hours of playing it. 30 hours. 30 hours of loathing, of having a bad time, of hearing the fucking word falsy over and over again. All of that was expected to just be forgiven and forgotten because if you didn't eat and shit, you'd get to something good after a full day and a quarter of slogging through it. All the piss-poor writing, all the confused, messy combat, all the dour, boring bullshit. It's fine because later on there's a bit of a green field that you can wander around in to make things feel like less of a one-track railroad through Jizzville. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure it's worth it. One could, if they were feeling particularly dismissive, handwave this entire suggestion as discrediting itself through its own evidenced absurdity. Rest assured, however, that I shall do no such handwaving because I'm a content creator, damn it. And if we can stretch 10 minutes out of a 2-second sentence, we absolutely will, darling. It's what we online video purveyors do best. One hand, as they say, does not wash the other. No matter how much a game may improve, the fact remains that the majority of it was pure wank. You not only had a miserable time, you had a miserable time for a really fucking long time. If, say, you were at a stand-up comedy show and you sat there listening to this really boring routine that nobody was laughing at, and they told one funny joke near the end, you'd still say Stephanie put on a really fucking bad show, wouldn't you? If you bought a jacket and one sleeve was made of soft, supple leather, but the rest of it was made of oily rags lined with dead bees, you'd probably not use that tailor again, right? I could do these all day. If you ate a donut and it was a top quality fucking donut, like one of those freshly fried ones you get at fun fairs, but instead of jelly inside, it's just loads of cum, that's not a jelly donut, is it? No. I'll tell you what that is. It's a cum donut. A donut full of cum. A nut to nut. You only get one first impression, and while our individual tolerance for nut-nuts may vary, I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect that even if a game got brilliant after a long period of being awful, a not insignificant number of people would find it hard to forgive the fact it had been fucking shit. That even if it was doing things the player liked, that player would be more than justified if they'd become too fucked off by that point to give a damn. How a game shapes our attitude towards it while we play it is all part and parcel of whether or not that game is an enjoyable experience. There have been times when a game starts doing something I'd ordinarily find brilliant but just couldn't enjoy as much as I otherwise would have because I'd been put in a bad fucking mood and made to work much harder to get to the enjoyment that should have been there from the start. Here's a spin on that concept. A game I didn't despise but was still less impressed by than everyone else was Spec Ops: The Line. Now don't get me wrong, when it comes to using the medium of video games to tell a subversive story, The Line is laudable as hell and deserves to be remembered. It's such an average run-of-the-mill oorah love my guns action game that for those of us who played it back in the day before its surprises became well known, truly did hide a fucking surprise inside itself, transforming as it does into a dark and borderline surreal examination of video game violence, linearity versus choice, and American culture's fascination with war. It does some amazing stuff, and the year it came out, I got a lot of comments asking why it wasn't on my Game of the Year list, why I didn't count it as award-worthy, and the answer was that, for as incredible as its ideas were, it was still ultimately kinda dull to play as a game. For all its intellectual twisting of third-person shooters, it was still mechanically just another cover shooter, and not a particularly good one. Spec Ops: The Line is a fascinating example of not just this subject, but the one of media that embodies the thing it aims to satirize. I very much enjoy experiencing that game. I just don't like playing it very much. Whatever else it may become doesn't change what it is.
Steph, it's really delicately organised in here. There's a system. There is a system. Each
Brilliant.
Carefully labelled.
Shove that there. This is Dr. Stephanie with the blue with Grimace. Is it Grimace or not?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Holy crap! What is that?
Oh,
mate.
It's quite loud. Oh, jeez.
Oh, that's horrible. Oh, colourful things.
I'll be downstairs.
Now here's an example of a game that I personally fucking adore. One that I think truly does become a thing of sheer mind-blowing brilliance, but only after you've invested an amount of time that could quite rationally be considered unreasonable. That game, as I'm sure many of you could have guessed, is Nier Automata. What is it with Square Enix games and this trope? While this situation could apply to any Nier game, Automata is the one I actually like, so that's what we're talking about. Nier Automata does much more than expect you to play it for a long time before before it gets good. It expects you to finish the fucking game itself. In fact, to get everything, it expects you to beat it about, what, 5 fucking times? You won't actually see the kind of game Nier Automata really is until after you've witnessed the credits rolling. And I mean rolling in a standard way as opposed to any number of ways it could give you some fucking weirdo ending, because that's the kind of series Nier is. I said way back when I reviewed it that I honestly wouldn't blame anybody who played it for a while, thought it was a pretty standard, if slightly eccentric action game, and left it there. But this philosophical, genre-defying, truly provocative game doesn't show you what it is until after many people would have abandoned it. The game's first run is almost a trick, because it's only after the end point that you start new games as other characters, doing all sorts of new things that build upon the plot and break the fourth wall, all leading up to, after hours and hours of play, a choice about whether or not to delete your entire save data to reinforce the game's own themes, which I did! It only felt right. To properly detail it, I'd have to dedicate an entire video to it, but safe to say, it's one of my favourite games of all time, one of the most effective pieces of media I've ever experienced, and I also wouldn't blame anybody who wrote it off as forgettable, disposable silliness. For Nier Automata to do what it does on purpose, to deliberately invoke the it gets good trope, takes some fucking brass ones. And it does demonstrate a very real counterpoint to everything I'm saying, because yes, it does get better after a considerable time sink. It gets fucking brilliant, in fact. So, is Nier Automata the exception that proves the rule, or does its very existence disprove the rule I just spent this video siding with until now? I think really though that no matter how much I personally adore the game and could gush all day about the ingenious ways in which it peels its layers away with every playthrough, it remains thoroughly unreasonable for me to demand that anybody who isn't enjoying it put themselves through a load of boring crap to get to the bits I personally deem fantastic. Then again, there is a major difference between a game like Nier Automata and a game like Final Fantasy XIII. Nier Automata still offers really engaging combat and interesting narrative hooks before it gets to the jaw-droppers. I still got a lot of entertainment out of its mask before I got to see the face behind it. If it had done what some wannabe subversive games have tried before and been fucking shit to play on purpose, I would more than likely be intellectually offended by it, which would have ultimately soured me on the whole thing. Games are increasingly expensive and their players increasingly busy as we all try to survive the dystopian hellscape that is our overpriced and undermining society. I know that people who get mad about game reviews have the entitled attitudes of children and therefore might not have the same considerations we adults do, but people have got jobs to work, families to resent, and landlords to fruitlessly pester for basic maintenance. To tell anybody with a life to waste 30 hours on a game that might get better later rather than spend just as long playing one that's immediately enjoyable is unfair from the simple standpoint of respecting their bloody time. Why waste all that time eating a shit sandwich to reach a bit of cheese in the middle when you can just buy a block of cheese, which in this case is Bone Razor Minions? I think part of all this stems from television, particularly American TV shows. We've reached a point now where so many TV shows have slow first seasons and don't really pick up until the second or third that a lot of us have just come to expect to eat our vegetables if we want to be entertained. The one I always think about is Breaking Bad, the first season of which I found cute but not particularly enthralling, but truly got into and came to adore once season 2 picked up and the story got to develop, and on a rewatch, I just started season 2. A series of a television program can run pretty damn comparable to these lengthy video game time sinks, but I think it's easier to justify them to some degree. A TV show is, by its nature, a constantly developing thing, one generally expected to deepen as it continues and more time is spent on its characters and themes, as further seasons give the writers more time to flesh out everything they spent the first season establishing, and as is often the case, budgets expand according to success and allow the show to do things it didn't previously have the resources for. It's a different medium after all, with a different set of rules, though if we call back to Nier Automata, I think one consistent rule must still be observed. No matter how slow a burn the first season is, it can't be so fucking shit that nobody wants to watch it. It still has to be well made and or entertaining enough to be worth watching to some degree, if only for the fact that it won't fucking get its second season if people aren't watching. Everything I just said is true for all television shows except those produced by Netflix, of course, which will cancel a show regardless of performance for fun. Both the TV and Nier examples are important to note whenever someone is telling you a thing gets good after 30 hours, due to the fact that if they're defending a game from criticism, it's almost guaranteed that they still enjoyed it before that 30-hour mark. But in their minds, it went from, say, good to great, and assume for you it'll go from bad to good. It's not as if Final Fantasy XIII fans were inclined to agree with any of my criticisms to begin with. No, their experience with it likely mirrored mine with Nier Automata. They liked it from the start, and are expecting others to slog through something that for them was never a slog to begin with. It is once again an unreasonable and rather self-centered demand. And that leads me to another point I feel is worth considering. I've rarely found the "it gets good after 30 hours" argument to be actually true. I hated Final Fantasy XIII after about an hour in, and I fucking hated it after about 40 hours in. Even the bits that were better were still part and parcel of a game I overall loathed, and nothing it did was ever actually enjoyable for me, much less good enough to change my mind. Rare is the game that alters its own perspective, story and presentation as much as Nier. Neither Final Fantasies 13 or 16 does anything nearly as dramatic. No, most stick to the tone they establish, shifting up and down a little, but never straying too drastically from their decided lane. In the case of Final Fantasy 16, while the narrative focus shifts away from the stomach-churning, casual cruelty of a society at once disgusted by and utterly obsessed with bearers, said shift does not undo what we've already seen. The first part of the game establishes the world, as in it's already told me it's a vile, detestable world populated by mustache-twirling monsters and slaves that are such inconsequential plot motivators that they're objectified by the game itself just as much as they are by their owners. That is quite literally established by the time Clive's moved on to combating eldritch entities, campaigning against metaphorical climate change, and enjoying the tonal whiplash that comes with huge-scale, wildly entertaining boss fights immediately followed by slow-moving and fucking dull fetch quests. God, this game really is all over the place. I'm now well past 30 hours and Final Fantasy XVI has done nothing to subvert the expectations it spent the first 10 hours conditioning into me. In fact, it only continues to reinforce them in the background, even if they're no longer in the forefront, with overheard NPC dialogue still featuring plenty of cunts being utter cunts.
Out of my sight, wretch! I've no use for a branded who can't even fill my cup.
Games do not have to be immediately brilliant to be brilliant. You know, Killer 7 is up there with Automata among my favourite games ever, but funnily enough, I fucking hated it for the first hour as I came to grips with its weird gameplay and impregnable writing. It's okay for a game to take time to pace itself to get better and better as it goes on, just, you know, it can't get away with taking 30 fucking hours to do it. If you're gonna defend a game from critique, this just ain't the way. It's not a reasonable, fair demand on anybody's time, and it will breed so much resentment that it's highly likely the player will be too burned out to enjoy the allegedly good parts, if they even stuck around that long. More to the point, and to reiterate, it's not even true most of the time. It's ultimately just another method of trying to impose your tastes onto other people, and let me tell you, no amount of imposing will force someone to change their tastes. It'll only make them further inclined to reject yours. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta get back to Final Fantasy XVI because despite all its narrative problems, it actually is quite fucking good.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
I tell you what though, Stoops, you should put me in one of your pop songs. How about that?
Yeah.
I'm good for music videos.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, very photogenic.
Mm-hmm.
Very good at dancing.
Oh, you got the moves?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, right, no pressure or anything, you don't have to listen at all, but, right, I've written my own songs.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, I'm a little bit embarrassed, but since you insist, you know, maybe you could put them in an album, or something like that. Right, so here's one I wrote myself. Sterling Original.
Far away.
Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley.
Whilst we're at it, I actually wanted to show you, I've got some really strong opinions about microtransactions that I wanted to talk to everyone about right now.
Okay, what is this?
So it's predatory, is what it is.
What is this?
It's a predatory system that preys on the vulnerable people.
Don't make a point about what I'm doing. Don't like parody my own behaviour back at me, because I don't care for it. Where did you get the hat from? That's a violation. Don't touch my stuff. That was mine. Don't invite yourself.
Have you been checking what Phoenix has been putting on eBay?
Get out of my studio. Get out. Get your hand off my train. Right, I'm going. We're keeping this take and I'm going. Oh God, I'm sorry.
Come on, get out. Shoot. Leave.
Wrong way.
Thank God for that.